Hello and welcome to this panel in which we will discuss some of the ideas around pseudoscience in food. Is everybody having a nice time at QED? Yeah. Thank God for that. Some would say, I'm one of the organisers, my name's Andy Wilson, I'm a big food fan, as you may be able to tell. I may be too big a fan, but I'm delighted to be hosting this panel, Hungry Like the Wolfe, which we spelt with an E on the end. You see what we did there? My idea, just saying. Thank you very much, yes. So I have organised this panel into four delicious courses. We're going to have an appetiser, and then we're going to have a fish course, a main and a dessert. Sounds delicious, right? And we're going to use the awesome throw box here. So there's going to be some questions from the audience, and we're going to do that by throwing the box to each other and then speaking directly into this cross on the top. Is that okay? What could possibly go wrong, right? So we'll get to that shortly. So we'll begin with the appetiser, but first, as an amuse-bouche, let's say, we'll have some introductions. So could we start over there with Anthony?
Oh, yes. Hello. My name's Anthony Warner. I'm a chef. I've been a chef for 20 years. I also write a blog called The Angry Chef, where I sort of rail against pseudoscience and pretensions and stupidity in the world of food. And I just have a book out July this year, which is about the same and about exposing dietary myths and the reason why people are inclined to believe them.
Awesome. It's a bit early for a plug, just saying.
Never too early for a plug.
Hello, I'm Charlotte Hardman. I'm a psychologist. So I've come over today from the University of Liverpool, where I'm a lecturer in the Department of Psychological Sciences. So I do research on eating and food. So I'm interested in the factors which contribute to the foods that we eat, how much we eat, and in trying to use this knowledge to, in part, explain the obesity crisis. So I've been working in this area for about 17 years now. Worked in various different institutions on different research projects, but all about understanding the psychology of eating.
Hi, I'm Kavin Senapathy, and I'm a science communicator, and I write about health, medicine, parenting, and all of this often intersects with food. And the name of this panel is great, and I'm especially famous because David Wolfe once called me a shill on Twitter.
Okay, well, brilliant. Let's welcome them all with a big round of applause. Yeah. We're going to open things up with our tasty appetiser. So the first question, which I'll direct at Kavin first, what was your first experience or awakening of pseudoscience in food? And can you identify a particular tipping point that made you take action or get involved?
Yeah, the first real I was always aware of it, but the tipping point was when I became a mother, and I realized that so much of the fear-based marketing was targeted at us. And so that's when I decided that I needed to help demystify this and help people relax.
Okay, Charlotte.
Again, I don't think I can identify a specific tipping point. I mean, I think generally what I find quite frustrating is the scaremongering, because I just don't think it's effective, and these sorts of messages that you can't eat this food, you can't eat that food, you know, fruit is evil, these sorts of messages, because I've got a lot of experience of kind of working with people, working with kids, for example, about getting them to eat healthy foods, and so what we've kind of found really in our research is it's actually more about the positive messages. So kind of rather than demonizing certain foods and saying you can't eat this, you can't eat that, it's about kind of promoting these sorts of more positive attitudes towards eating. So I think, yeah, it's these negative messages which make me quite cross, because I don't think they're going to work and be effective.
Okay. And Anthony?
I'm going to say Gillian McKeith, who I was sort of interested in that sort of first incarnation. And then sort of years later, and I think she was exposed and everyone laughed about her fake doctorate, but years later, I started sort of seeing people giving out, a lot of people on the internet giving out health advice in this sort of new way of communicating via sort of Instagram and various internet influencers. And I was listening to a particular clean eating blogger speaking at a food conference, and just was astounded by the absolute nonsense that she was talking about dairy drawing calcium from your bones, and about so just creating fear-based messages about particular foods, and also this sort of idealization of superfoods, making sort of this idea that you can only eat healthily if you're eating really expensive ingredients. And so it was just sort of the rise of the clean eating movement was what sort of really inspired me to start writing about this, because I have a teenage daughter. Although she's fine about food, I understand how susceptible that generation is to sort of messages they're receiving online, and how we need to really help a generation of people who've grown up with so much information really critically analyse the stuff that's being sort of thrown at them. So.
Okay, all right. Well, a casual click to a headline from an ad server, probably in the Telegraph, read, "Diabetes breakthrough leaves doctors baffled. Do this tonight." I think that this referred to something to do with beetroot, but frankly, I didn't watch the whole thing. So, magical detox, miraculous food cancer cures, mystifying weight loss programs, organic this, alkaline that. Why are these ideas so persistent, and why are they so sticky? Charlotte, can you go first, please?
I think, as human beings, we want to kind of identify cause and effect. We want to kind of find ways of explaining our behaviour. And I think a lot of these diets can kind of give these sorts of messages and kind of what seem like quite clear guidelines. Okay, so if I just don't do this, then, I'm not going to get diabetes. Or if I do this, this is going to protect me. And unfortunately, it's never going to be as simple as that. When you look at the science behind the headlines, this is often a lot more sort of nuanced. We're talking about things like relative risk. So, but I think, we quite like these sorts of simple rules that we can follow. It helps us make sense of these sort of the complicated and conflicted information that's around us. So I think it's sort of the simplicity. But actually, if you start to break it down and look at it, it's not that simple. If you look at the whole list of foods that if you're, for example, following low-carb, high-fat diets, the whole list of foods that then you can't eat if you're following these sorts of diets is actually really, really baffling. So I think actually these things can seem quite simple, but when you start to actually break it down and try and follow some of these so-called diets, it's actually incredibly complicated. So we're making it more complicated, I think, than it needs to be.
Okay. So, Kavin, why are these ideas so persistent, and why are they so sticky?
Yeah, it may sound strange, but I think it's the same fundamental worldview that brought us Donald Trump, right? If we can
just make a note. That's the first mention of Donald Trump.
Yeah. Okay. So if we can, or if a group or a person or a celebrity can help allay our anxieties about anything and simplify a scapegoat, and we can simply avoid something. And the reason I bring up Donald Trump is, for us, Trump said, hey, you don't have jobs, you're struggling here. We can blame immigrants, or we can just get rid of these people and then it will be fine, right? And the same way, the anxieties around our health and the well-being of our families are very real. So if we can simply just avoid, GMOs or toxins, then everything will be okay. So it's along the lines of what Charlotte was saying.
Okay. If you could comment, Anthony, as well, and then finish.
Yeah.
When I was reading your book, which I haven't finished yet,
Thanks for the plug.
you gave a great... I haven't decided whether to finish it yet. I was going to meet you in person first and then decide whether Amazon give refunds. But, could you finish with your lapwing analogy from the book, which I think is a very short version of your lapwing analogy from the book.
I can do. The one thing I'd add to the other two comments as well is that a lot of the rhetoric is about, in politics and in food, is about returning to this sort of once lost Eden. We're all inclined to think that things were better in the past. Not necessarily true, but it's a very human instinct. It underlies a lot of religion, it underlies all these things, and so that's something that it really appeals to, going back to when things were better in the past, things were more natural. The lapwing analogy, particularly. So if anyone who lives in sort of English countryside, I guess most of English countryside, especially the Midlands where I live in North Nottinghamshire, you see in the springtime you see lots of hares running around the fields, and they do their sort of fighting thing, where boxing. And you also, in the same fields that you see the hares, you also see these little scrapes in the ground, and the scrapes in the ground have eggs, little colourful eggs in there. Which is slightly strange to see a hare, because often they're sat next to this little pile of colourful eggs. And it's quite a common thing to see, and actually it's sort of entered European mythology from medieval Europe, and it's sort of where this idea, hares laying eggs or bringing eggs as gifts to celebrate the coming of the spring, is where the Easter bunny and delivering chocolate eggs it supposedly comes from. And it's very easy when you see two things sort of really close together, really correlated in the same time and place. It's very, very easy to sort of make up a story, to make up a narrative to explain that. So this idea that the rabbits laid the eggs is a powerful story, and it's very powerful sort of mythology that's entered our culture. In reality, the eggs are laid by lapwings, which are a wetland bird which come inland and lay their eggs in these particular fields. But because they're quite flighty, you don't see the lapwings. So the lapwings are kind of the actual cause, and the confounding factor there is the coming of the spring. Both things, the hares come out and fight and become very visible in the springtime. The lapwings lay their eggs in the springtime. So there's a confounding factor. We don't see the actual cause. We see the two things correlated, the eggs and the hares, and we assume that one causes the other. And I think we do that with lots of things. We do that. So if you cut gluten out your diet and you feel better, you're likely to sort of correlate the two things together, even though one doesn't necessarily cause the other. Was that quick enough?
I think that was quick enough, yeah. The paragraph I've read of his book is really good. I did read more than that, yeah. It's a good book.
Sales are sale.
Right, well, I think it's time to move on to the fish course now. And let's talk about those names. Let's talk about celebrities, shall we? They are a firm part of the pseudoscience landscape by now. Dr. Oz, 6 million Facebook followers. David Avocado Wolfe's Facebook page, the eponymous David Avocado Wolfe, has been liked and followed by over 11 million people, including 9 of my own Facebook friends. Fuck them, right? And they often share Mr. Wolfe's ideas onto my feed. It's a little bit annoying. I am tired of correcting them, if that's the correct word, or asking them to not do. But what the hell's going on here? Charlotte, based on your research into what influences eating behaviour, could you start us off by discussing the impact of pseudoscientific food celebrities, please? I can't say the word. How big a role can celebrity voice play in eating behaviour? Just a peek at the psychology behind that. If you can,
sure. So we know that one of the things that most strongly influences our eating is social influences. So hundreds and hundreds of studies have shown that we're very influenced by the people in our immediate proximity. So we will tend to eat more if we're with somebody else who's eating more. But this effect is not equal. So if we like or admire someone a little bit more, if we kind of feel like we want to kind of ingratiate ourselves with somebody, we will tend to model them even more. So some people have stronger influences on others. In kids, it's been shown that slightly older kids are better role models than kids who are of a similar age. So then this kind of really kind of magnifies when you're talking about celebrities, because obviously celebrities are highly admired. People want to kind of feel like they're being like celebrities. So if we see a celebrity doing something engaging in a particular behaviour, then that does have a strong influence. And again, this has been shown in studies. So studies with food marketing, for example, have shown celebrities are extremely influential. It's been shown with popular children's characters endorsing children's food. This increases children's preference and intake of these particular foods. And I think certainly, you know, in the culture that we're living in now, where we're surrounded, and younger people in particular are surrounded by social media, the Instagram culture, Facebook, so increasingly these sorts of images are everywhere, and they do have an effect. And actually, interestingly, you know, one might think, well, can we turn this on its head? And so can we use celebrities to promote a counterculture, which is sort of the obvious thing to do, is can we get celebrities to promote healthy foods? But actually the data so far are suggesting that that doesn't seem to be as effective, unfortunately.
Oh, that's a nightmare, isn't it?
It's a bit of a shame. Initial data that's coming out so far, anyway.
Ban celebrities.
Ban celebrities.
Ban celebrities, good idea.
Hashtag.
Thanks, Charlotte. Well, Kavin, we'll be having some questions soon, by the way, part way through. So if you've got something on your mind, you'll have a moment. In a moment, you'll have a chance to ask the question. But Kavin, maybe using the food babe, Vani Hari, as an example, do you find that these people will engage or respond to you when you attack their ideas? In 2015, you said that you knew Vani Hari was aware of your work, but had responded only directly. Has anything changed? I mean, you might want to talk also about Mr. Wolfe, who does seem to quite like you. So yeah, can you talk to that a little bit? Do they engage?
They tend not to engage directly, right? They position themselves as victims almost. And so they'll engage indirectly, kind of saying, hey, this person attacked me. Isn't that just awful? But the only time I've ever interacted in a normal way, I guess you can say, with the Food Babe is in 2015 when I was writing an article about her, Mercola, and Mark Hyman. If you're familiar with all of them, they all like to demonize certain chemicals and additives. But if you look at the products that they sell carefully, and my co-author for this article is really good at looking into this, they also sell products that contain these ingredients or chemicals, and it's not clear whether or not they're aware of this. So I reached out to her as a courtesy for comment for this article, and rather than answering my questions, she kind of tried to play cat and mouse with me and said, well, yeah, I would consider answering your questions if you disclose every single source of income you ever have, and ever have had, I'm paraphrasing here, and have you worked with any nonprofits or any PR groups? And we went back and forth for a bit, and I finally said, listen, Vani, I reached out as a courtesy, and so I'm just going to say that you declined to comment. Thank you for your response. But no, the reason, long story short, that they don't engage, they'll never, many of us have given them opportunities to have a public discussion or a debate in any form of their choosing, and they're not going to do it because they know that they'll be destroyed. I mean, it's not. I'm very modest, but I mean, like the other experts, the experts will destroy them, and I'll just watch and eat popcorn. That's my fantasy. It'll never happen.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Anthony. You've famously become angry. Is there anyone in particular who is the subject of your ire? I know that when we announced you were appearing at QED, Banff started trolling you.
Oh, yes.
That's a regular thing, presumably.
Yes.
Can you share that a little bit about that, but also in your day job as a chef and food consultant, does your online persona affect the way people interact with you or the way you interact with them when they're suggesting menus, for example? So trolling first and then professional life second.
Yeah, BANT, if people don't know who BANT are, they're the British Association of Nutritional Therapists, so they sort of regulate nutritional therapists, or sort of endorse them and give them a badge to put on their websites, which makes them look sort of official, because obviously, anyone can pretty much call themselves a nutritionist or a qualified nutritionist. Doesn't seem to take much to become a member of BANT. But yeah, when my name was announced here, they decided to have a go at me, which didn't go well for them, I've got to be honest. I mean, because some of the people that they endorse and some of the practices they endorse, they advertise homeopathy on their website, and they advertise people who follow the GAPS diet, which is this sort of pseudo-scientific dietary cure for autism. They don't really have much of a leg to stand on, and I have quite a lot of fairly serious academics generally backing me up in any argument with them. Yeah, I mean, who actually troubles me the most? I mean, there are quite a few, and at two levels. There's the extreme ends for people like. So when I talk about GAPS diet, there's the founder of that, Natasha Cameron-Bride, is I consider her to be extremely dangerous. The GAPS diet is a very, very restrictive diet. Dietitians who have looked into it said that if a child followed it to the letter for a significant period of time, which is recommended, then they would become seriously ill. They could potentially die, and it's claimed to be a cure for autism and ADHD and a number of other conditions with no basis and no evidence. So I consider people like her to be at the extreme, at the dangerous end. So I suppose that makes me incredibly angry. But at the other end, you have the likes of Gwyneth Paltrow, who endorses all this stuff, and I feel that that end, it's the kind of the entry level. It's what really ruins our potential for critical thinking. It ruins the population. You know, the way we assimilate information. We get so much information. We're having to make very quick, instinctive decisions. So celebrities like that, who are aspirational, and people are going to be inclined to believe, I feel, are sort of encouraging people to abandon the tenets of reason and just go, I'll just believe anything, and that leads down dangerous paths for a lot of people into sort of eating disorders for some people, and into the sort of dangerous pseudoscience for others. So I actually think in some ways there's always going to be extremists and there's always going to be sort of idiots around, but it's this high level endorsement by aspirational celebrities which is creating the potential for sort of a lot of damage down the line.
I'll say it was hilarious actually, because Anthony and I had some exchanges while he was agreeing to come on here, and thoroughly nice chap on the telephone, lovely. I thought, how come he's called the Angry Chef? And then Bant got involved online, and I found out immediately why it's called the Angry Chef. It was really quite funny. And how does your approach affect your professional life? Do you think it affects it at all? Do you just keep it under the radar, or?
I'm sure there's some people I would never let me work for them. I'm a chef. I'm also a development chef in the food manufacturing industry. So full disclosure, that's what I do for a living. I work for Big Food. So anyone talking to me is a shill talking to the food manufacturing industry. And I think I have to be completely open about that. And there's sometimes a nervousness, but really what I'm trying to do is sort of just get people to have a better relationship with food. So actually, within the it's been quite good for the interactions I have. Yeah. It makes a difference when people take me anywhere to eat. They're always extremely nervous that there's going to be some sort of kale and smashed avocado on the menu, and I'm going to lose my shit. But
that's what I'm hoping is going to happen.
But no, I mean, in reality, I just, the reason I do what I do and the reason I write what I write is not because I want to attack people. It's just because I love food. So I love eating. And that's like the heart of what I do, is just trying to strip away all this bullshit that people are believing and all this guilt and shame and difficulties people are having with eating. So actually, as long as I sort of stay to that sort of message, I'm not just sort of maliciously attacking people. I'll never go for Bant, but if they ever go at me, fucking hell.
Fair enough. All right, so we're going to go in a moment to the questions. Just final topic while everybody's thinking about that is, where's the harm? Just a quick comment, where's the harm? Obviously, there's the wallet, but where's the harm in all of this? And I don't mind what order we go in. Charlotte, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think, just sort of touching on some of the points that have been made already, it's the guilt, there's sort of the negative messages, which I think are really harmful. And yeah, certainly from the work that I've done in psychology, I think it's about trying to promote these positive messages. We all have to eat. Food is, a fundamental source of energy. If we don't eat, we're going to die. But there's also the pleasure. Eating is a pleasurable and something that is enjoyable. It's nice to do. It's something that we do in social groups. I think it's a lot more than just getting calories into our bodies. And I think it's trying to foster these positive relationships that is the way forward, and it's the negativity, and that you can't eat this food and you can't eat that. It's incredibly restrictive. It's complicated. It makes, you go out to a restaurant, you can't eat the sorts of things. You're forever thinking, well, can I eat this? Can I eat that? I can't go here. I can't go there. I can't eat at this time. And I think it is completely unnecessary.
Okay, thank you. Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy when you talk about what's the harm. It's easy to go into the sort of the cancer cures and the autism cures and the eating disorders. But actually, I think it's really important to remember that food is the one point where the public most interacts with science. People are really, really interested in food science stories. People are really interested in nutrition. People are interested in understanding the science. And when that debate about food science is just so clouded with sort of superstitions and myths and bad science and the sort of influential celebrities who are selling people oversimplistic rubbish, then it's damaging for people's relationship and understanding of science generally, and acceptance of, leaving people too open to not critically appraise what they're being sold. And I think it's really important. I think food has, nutrition science has to be like the front line of where people are interacting with science the most, and where we really need to kind of defend evidence and defend the proper understanding of how that influences us.
All right, thanks. Kavin.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the most important harms is the policy impact, right? If we reject certain food technologies, and I'm always talking about GMO, so I'll just use that as an example. If we reject genetic engineering, and that has an impact on policy all over the world. So now we're in the West avoiding GMOs because we have that privilege. But then when we reject that, that has an impact in East Africa and India. Now farmers who need certain traits in their crops can't use them. So that's, to me, a harm that's not always as obvious.
Okay, great. Right, who has questions? Oh my goodness. Seem to be all concentrated here within range. There's a couple over there, so we'll have two here. I'm going to throw it out. Watch this fly, Cat. Are you ready? Into the cross at the top, please. Hold it right in front of your face.
I was just wondering...
Closer.
There's these fad diets, sort of detoxification and, eating clay and charcoal. And most worryingly, what I've seen among my peer group is sort of water diets, where you're supposed to just drink water for a sustained period of time to sort of cleanse your body and not have any toxins. Yeah. And I think it's all ridiculous, but I do see that reflected among my friends and my peers.
Okay. Throw it to somebody else. Who'd like to take that one? I can't work out who that's most suitable. Kavin, will you take that one, please?
The question, I just want to make sure I understood you correctly, is why do people do this?
Does it have any basis?
Oh, I couldn't speak to that. Do either of you know?
Water
I mean,
diet.
it doesn't have a basis. I mean, the easy answer, but where does that come from?
I've written a lot about it. No.
Okay, next question.
There is no scientific basis for any particular diet or any particular dietary intervention having a detoxing effect on your body. Your liver and kidneys do a perfectly good job. And every time you go to the toilet, you're detoxing, I suppose, in the eye limit. But it's nonsense, and it plays to this sort of idea that modern life is sort of toxic and broken, and it's very appealing. It's very appealing to people to want to believe that. I think that we can somehow cleanse ourselves, and you'll see it in all sorts of analogies in religion about sort of purity and achieving purity through controlling your diet. But in terms of fact, no. I mean, I don't think there's any evidence that any food has a detoxing capacity, and there's no evidence that our lives are particularly more toxic than they've ever been either.
Just to add to that as well, we're actually full of bacteria, and bacteria are good. So
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, I had a baby recently, and I was told by, at least this is very anecdotal, midwives and health visitors, that a lot of people are getting their influence of how to behave with their babies and stuff from soap operas, and not just necessarily famous celebrities like Gwyneth Paltrow, but say what people do on EastEnders, and they say they panic every time someone does something like, oh my God, people genuinely do that. Now this is anecdotal, I appreciate that, but is that something that could be used positively by the BBC, Channel 4 and public service broadcasters, or would they need to have evidence that this is actually a true effect? Does anybody else want to swear?
I do. I want
sorry.
to. Oh. Carry on, please. Who's going to take that one?
Well, I personally wasn't aware of that, so that's very interesting that, at least that you've heard it. And of course, I think the media can always have a positive effect if spreading correct messaging. So that would be great.
I think it speaks to the issue as well around kind of social influences. But I also think, TV shows, obviously aren't going to give a realistic perspective. It's going to be sensationalised. It's not really going to be how things happen in the real world. So I think it is quite worrying that people are sort of basing themselves on. I mean, I think it's similar to the whole celebrity thing. People look at a celebrity and think, well, I want to be like that. I want to be like as thin and as beautiful as they are. But, these people don't live in the real world. They have these just, lives that are so far away from reality that, I think it is worrying that people, but I think that's kind of why people are so susceptible to the messages, because it's sort of, well, if I follow what they're saying, they must know because they're like this, or if I do that, I will be like that as well.
Okay, one last question before we move on. Can it go over to, I can't remember your name, Dr. Reese's dad? Yeah, Paul, that's it, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sort of increasingly frustrated every time I see the word superfood bandied around. What can we do to get rid of that from the public psyche?
Well, does anyone know? Because, I mean, getting rid of that would be extremely tough. I think you might not necessarily get rid of it, but simply make the point that many foods have super qualities and not just the ones that celebrities make a buck off of. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we're all stuck about how to get rid of that one, Paul.
That's a hard one.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's instead move on to the main course. People on Facebook are constantly sharing little dietary memes like detoxify with kale and so on. Which is the dietary fad which gets your goat the most? And please talk about why. So, Kavin, you're going to be talking about GMO this afternoon, so perhaps give us your second unfavourite.
Yeah, the one that really bugs me lately is when companies add sugar to things, but they say that they add real sugar or cane sugar, so that somehow makes it better.
Nice. Charlotte?
Yeah, I mean, I think just building on that, just some of the confusion around sugar and that, that there's good sugar and bad sugar, and that we can all go and eat loads of honey because that's good sugar. But then equally, I'm not. I think it's just these very restrictive diets that kind of say you can't eat whole classes of foods, and then that actually can lead to people potentially becoming malnourished if they follow them to the T. So I think you need to be getting across this sort of idea. It's about moderation rather than just cutting out whole categories of foods and demonising whole macronutrient groups.
Okay, cool. Anthony, what gets your goat?
It's difficult. Yeah, I wrote a book with loads of them.
I feel quite angry.
Honestly, it's hard to choose. It's like picking a favourite child, but it's I'd say the alkaline diet is the one that irritates me the most because it's garbage. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. There's no, the idea that food can. I mean, everyone doesn't know what the alkaline diet is. This is the idea that your body wants to be in an alkaline state, and you can alkalize it with certain foods, and other foods acidify it. So don't eat the acidic foods because that's what causes disease. Anyone with any medical training here will know that if your body acidifies or alkalizes in any way, you'll be dead. So obviously, it's not true that these foods do that. And the idea is that these foods, if you eat the acidic foods, your body will become acidic, and that's the cause of all disease. And literally, they believe it's the cause of all disease. And it's nonsense. And the guy who kind of come up with all the ideas is a guy called Robert Young, who people will probably know is in jail in California for practicing medicine without a license. Self-proclaimed victory. Self-proclaimed greatest researcher in the history of science. And if you read his book, you'd have to reject everything we understand about science in order to believe what he says in that book. Yeah. So it's nonsense, but it won't go away. I saw an article with Elle Macpherson like just this week saying she's using this alkaline diet in order to massively improve her health. It's accepted by celebrities, and the idea, the reason why is because if you exclude all the foods they tell you to exclude, you will lose some weight. And there's kind of no doubt about that. But that doesn't mean you'll be healthy. That doesn't mean it's going to cure disease. That just means you're going to have a really, really restricted diet. And this idea that certain foods acidify you, make a sort of caustic and dangerous, is a really dangerous association for people to make. It won't go away. The guy's in jail. And and you've still got these really high-profile celebrities coming out and saying, I'm on this diet and it's revolutionised my health. That one gets me.
Okay. Well, just a slight change of topic, but still on diets. Kavin, can you say something about the success or failure rate of diets in general and fatty diets in particular?
Oh, fatty diets in particular. I think we've covered this a little bit, but it's a bit of the cause and effect thing. Like you said, if we cut out whole food groups, then you will lose weight, and then people think that it works and it spreads that way. And even if the guy ends up in jail, right, the damage is already done. So it's really, really hard to get these memes out of the public once they're there, and I think that's how they spread.
Okay, well, Anthony, your general advice in interviews is you've said just eat a wide variety of foods. Advice I'm following. I eat as many as possible. Why is that such difficult advice for people to accept?
It's difficult. I think one of the big problems is that sometimes for some people that won't result in weight loss, and we have this idea that the only thing the only measure of our health is actually our weight. So all diets are deemed successful if they make you lose weight, and we're forgetting about the important thing, which is actually we should be worried about people's health, not about people's weight. So we should be looking at, is that person more healthy? Because just because you've lost weight, in plenty of people, just if they lose weight, that's not a healthy thing to do. That's not a healthy thing to happen, or they won't be doing it in a healthy way. And in most people, they won't be doing it in a sustainable way. Most diets work short term, but don't work over sort of 5 years. Most people will regain weight. So I think that's the problem. We've become too obsessed that weight is the only measure of health, and we judge all diets and the success of every single bit of dietary advice on whether it will make people lose weight. And if it doesn't always do that, then we think that's bad advice. But I think we should be just forget the focus on weight and think about focusing on what is actually healthy and what's a healthy relationship with food and all the other hugely important things. We accept all this advice on really, really restrictive diets and completely ignore any impact that relationship with food might have on our mental health or our sort of interactions with people and our sort of the bonds we form between people. I think that's the main reason why, really.
Okay, and Charlotte, we talked about how a celebrity can influence eating habits. Is there something that's particular about these faddy diets? I think you have mentioned this already, but just expand on it. It's got a regimen, it's got clear guidelines. What's making it so attractive to people?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's the celebrity endorsement. I think there's the idea that if I follow this diet, I'm going to look like them. So people, I think, it's sort of about managing the expectations and having this expectation that you're going to lose this huge amount of weight and it's all going to happen very quickly and you're going to look like Gwyneth Paltrow. But of course, weight loss is going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. I think kind of focusing particularly on these sorts of faddy diets, I think, there was previously this sort of idea that, all I need to do is follow this diet for a few weeks and then I'm going to lose all this weight and then that will be it. I never have to do anything again. The weight's going to stay off. And, what studies have shown is that, if you follow a very restrictive diet, then yes, you will lose weight because you're consuming significantly fewer calories. But actually, how are you then going to maintain that? Because, you obviously don't want to be eating 1,500 calories a day for the rest of your life. So I think it's not about we need to be moving away from fatty diets and actually looking at helping people to make lifestyle changes which they can maintain overnight. So it's not just about, being on some diet which is going to be a miracle cure. It's about making sustainable changes that can be maintained over time. And I think that's the advice we need to be moving towards.
Okay, well, there's about 10 minutes left. I think what we'll do is we'll go back to questions now. I've got a final question for our panel, but let's go back to questions for the moment. Do you want to throw that at somebody, Kat? Ideally, somebody who had their hand up, I think. But
why me?
I wasn't suggesting abuse.
Hi.
Hi.
This is to the panel. What is your funniest pseudoscientific foodie little quip that you've heard?
There's nothing funny about it. Nothing.
I always find it quite funny because I do research on overeating and the extent to which food might be addictive. So I always find it funny when I see these headlines saying that cheese is addictive and chocolates is addictive as crack cocaine and all these sorts of things. Because when you actually kind of, this all sounds, wow, it's, very grand, but when you actually look at the science behind the study, actually, behind the headline, actually the study that has been done, might be something as simple as asking people, well, what are the foods that you think are most addictive? So, really the studies behind these grand headlines really don't stand up to them. A lot of them will be imaging, fMRI, brain scanning, which people get very impressed by, sort of showing up these areas of the brain, or these areas of the brain lighting up, and a lot of these sort of headlines come from the idea that if you show people nice food, then particular areas of the brain light up, and these happen to be the same areas that light up in people who have cocaine or heroin addictions. So this is all, and I think it really relates to what Anthony was saying about correlation not equaling causation. Just because something is similar doesn't mean they're the same thing, and it's lots of things make our brains light up. Our brains will light up to anything that's kind of interesting or important or motivationally relevant to us. So yeah,
okay.
That's these headlines.
Cool. Throw it to somebody else, please, who's got their hand up.
I've got a question.
Oh, you've got a question. Taking advantage of geography there.
If each of you could give a message to young people who are impressionable about their relationship with food, what would it be?
Great question. Kavin.
For me, it's that for young people, it's very important to have what I call a misinformation radar, right? We can vanquish the Vani Haris and the David Wolfes of the world, but like a hydra, right? Another head is always going to grow back. So when you encounter any bit of food advice, think about it, think critically about it, and don't just kind of jump on it because you think that it's going to help you.
So give them a radar. Give them a radar of some kind. Yeah. Anybody else?
I think it's just remembering that the things that you see online, the things you see on Instagram, on Facebook, the things that you see celebrities, this is an image that person is trying to portray to you. This is not real life. You're not seeing them, you're seeing what they want you to see. And so people are going to present particular, and often people will want to present themselves in a positive light, and that's not real, I think. So it's understanding that and appreciating that.
Anything to add there, Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, especially to young people who are interacting a lot online, and there's a lot of social signaling going on, guilt and shame have no place in the world of food. So if anyone's ever trying to make you feel guilty about something you've done and your dietary choices, then just don't listen to them, because that's it's such a negative thing, and has, being made to feel guilty and being made to feel shamed has far more negative health implications for you than eating a chocolate bar.
Great question. This is going brilliantly. Brilliantly.
I kind of have a serious question. Is it acceptable in this day and age for skeptics to like avocado?
It's going to go backwards in a moment. Yeah. Just in a moment. Please answer.
I think that it's absolutely.
This is just for you. This one.
It's absolutely acceptable. You're talking about avocado, not Wolfe.
The food.
Okay.
I don't think she was suggesting we eat David Avocado Wolfe.
I think it's absolutely acceptable, and I've been not lobbying, but pushing for some brilliant person to genetically engineer a non-browning avocado, and then they'll become less expensive, and we can all afford our mortgages.
Okay, let's leave that one there. Throw it backwards, please. Just to right to the back there, please. Thanks.
This, I think, follows on a little bit from what you were saying beforehand about guilt about food. I'm not a vegan. I can't vegan. But a lot of people have been trying to talk me into it, not for the moral reasons, but saying that eating meat gives me cancer, will give me cancer, it'll make me ill, it'll give me bowel cancer, etc., etc., etc. Is there any truth to the non-moral arguments for veganism?
Vegan.
Seems like that's one for Anthony to me.
Yes, vegans have issues with me. I went on the Moral Maze to talk about veganism. If everyone's ever heard that show, it's the most frightening thing I've ever done. All I remember, I don't remember any of it, but all I remember is people asking me if I'd eat my own dog. If I was really, really hungry, but otherwise, no. I honestly, I don't. Look, vegans. There's evidence from epidemiological studies that vegans can be healthier and have better health outcomes. It's because of what they include in their diet, in that they'll probably eat more fruit and vegetables, which is a good thing, rather than what they exclude. Within reasonable limits, there is no good evidence that meat is harmful. There is some evidence in high consumption of a link to colorectal cancer, especially for processed meats, for bacon and sausages. But within the amounts that we kind of eat, about 70 grams a day, but most people eat, no, there's not really a risk. There's no benefit from being a vegan and having a vegan diet you can't get from having a more varied diet with animal products in, as long as you're sort of eating lots of fruit and vegetables and doing all the things that actually they're benefiting from. I mean, one of the big issues I have with veganism is, especially as people move into this sort of idea of a more natural food movement, that there are vegan and plant-based bloggers saying that you don't need to take vitamin B12 supplements, which sensible vegans will, because there's no plant source of B12, and deficiency is very, very, very serious and it causes neurological damage, which is irreversible. So I worry about vegans in that context. In terms of moral choice, I think it's absolutely fine, but they tend to, because they're so passionate and they're so sort of buy into it so much, they tend to accept a lot of pseudoscience. Anyone who's seen What the Health? Anyone seen What the Hell? Oh my God! They tend to accept too much of this sort of pseudoscience and are sort of inclined to false beliefs because they're so sort of passionate about them.
And raw food diets.
Yeah. I mean, really.
Okay, can we take another question? Hands up, please.
No, not at all. I do agree with that.
Hi. Continuing on the subject of advices. And going back to what you were saying about the social experience of eating with your friends and your family, do you have any advice on how to deal with a friend or family member that suddenly says, no, now I'm allergic to gluten, for example, so I won't eat it anymore, and this is a personal anecdote, obviously. They've been eating it all their lives with no problem, and suddenly, no, not eating gluten anymore, so bread's out, cake's out, and it messes up the social experience for everyone, but especially for that person. And how do you, what's the better way to interact with them and try to make them change their mind?
My final question for the panel, so we'll join in, we might have time for another question after this, but so my final question was, what was your advice? How do we challenge these pseudoscientific ideas in a rational, persuasive way, with people who are close to us maybe sometimes? So let's hear from you on that. Keep your answers nice and tight, please. So we want the answer to the difficult question in few words. Thank you. Kavin, you go first.
Yeah, I'm going to do a really tight two-part answer. The first
Doesn't
is that
sound tight.
the first is that these conversations cannot happen in one day. They have to be a dialogue, and so you can't really throw evidence at people and expect them to believe you right away, right? And also pointing out obvious fallacies. One thing that Vani Hari gives us is she's a great framework for examining why people believe what they do. One of them, for example, is I call it the food babe fallacy, finding alternative industrial uses for certain ingredients and then saying that bread has yoga mats in it and pointing out that that's not how it works.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult. You're not going to change people overnight, and I think there's sort of the skepticism around experts, isn't there? So I think sometimes kind of saying, oh, well, look, this person, sometimes that can make people kind of cling on to the beliefs almost more rigidly. I mean, I sometimes think actually kind of people have to kind of come around to it themselves, and it might be that maybe they quit a certain food and say, oh, wow, I'm feeling so much better. It's really, really worked. But then actually, how long is that going to go on? Because, quite often these things have just happened because you're just, you've made some kind of change. And I almost kind of wonder whether ultimately it's going to come back round and they're going to realise, well, actually, no, hang on, it hasn't really made any difference. So I wonder whether it's kind of sort of letting them find it out themselves, sort of, but also trying to subtly maybe lead them more towards some other sources with better information.
Apart from ranting and swearing, Mr. Angry Chef,
You could
what
buy
would
it in
you
my
say?
book, obviously.
I wouldn't know.
No, it's very difficult. It really is, because some people have such ingrained beliefs about food. It's like religion in that way. But I just think we need to get to a point where we stop sort of obsessing about the health-giving properties of food and start worrying about what food means in a social context, how it improves our relationships, and talk about sort of our mental health more than some sort of magical power of antioxidants and phytochemicals. And so those sort of messages I think are really important to talk to people about and talk about. And I guess if your friend's so ingrained in the beliefs, just find ways to sort of engage with food, unless it's really getting to a point where it's dangerous and damaging. Find ways of engaging in the social, enjoyable things about food within the context of what they're eating.
Great. Well, that's all we have time for. Please join with me in thanking our panel of Charlotte Hardman, Anthony Warner and Kavin Senapathy. Thank you for coming to the panel room at QED. It's lunchtime. How about that for timing?